Thank you for joining us, everyone. Yeah, let's do some untangling. So, I get questions about this all the time, and my initial response is, how much time you got? Because there's no simple answer to what is happening down in the Tijuana River. How do we fix the problem? In fact, it's not even just one crisis. There are many crises, many problems which require a suite of solutions. And there are many actors. It's not just one actor, one agency, or even one country. And it is not the case where just one actor is at fault here. There's a lot of things going on. So, because of that, it's quite complex. I'll try to discuss this in a linear fashion. Um, but it's virtually impossible to shove all of this into a 40-minute presentation. But I do have a captive audience, so I will try my best and my darndest to untangle this mess for you all. All right, next. There we go. Okay, before we dive headfirst into some sewage, I wanted to introduce Coast Keeper, talk a little bit about our work in the Tijuana River Valley. Yes, I am an attorney. I'm the senior attorney with San Diego Coast Keeper, but we are not a law firm. We're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit, and our mission is to protect and restore the waters of San Diego County. And we do that through a number of different ways. We adopt a multifaceted approach, including having educators go into classrooms and teach K through 12 students water-based curriculum. We do a tremendous amount of outreach and engagement, very much like this presentation, but we speak to people before and after our beach cleanups. We do native planting and restoration events and a whole bunch of other events. You'll see us around the community. Come talk to us. We're very friendly. We also have a science program that conducts water quality monitoring through many waterways in the region, including the Tijuana River Valley. We sample 4 locations in the valley, as you see here, in full personal protective equipment. Do not try this at home. It is very dangerous. And this map, hopefully everyone can see my cursor. Yes, Nikki, I think that worked before. Uh, these 4 locations are where we collect those samples on the US side of the border. And we have partnered with our friends south of the border at PFEA through this binational partnership, the One Coastal Community, created a website with them, and all of our data is available at that website. And then, of course, Coast Keeper does a lot of advocacy work, both in litigation and um, policy and administrative advocacy. We're regularly engaged with entities like the Coastal Commission, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, our local, state, and federal elected officials, asking for everything from hard infrastructure fixes to funding to better permits and enforcement. We're a member of the Tijuana River Coalition, so big shout out to them. It allows us to divide and conquer and be in more places at the same time. So, while we're Coast Keeper in name, much of our work focuses on many other things outside of the immediate coast. We focus on inland waterways and we focus on policies that affect the whole region or a whole watershed, because everything is connected. Everything that happens in the watershed flows downstream and will end up affecting our beaches, bays, oceans, and coastline. Um, really quickly on some of the work that we have been up to in this specific Tijuana River Valley itself. As I mentioned, we conduct our monitoring. We have sued the US IBWC. I'll touch on that through this presentation. We also filed a petition or a submission through the USMCA treaty, um, basically saying, hey, Mexico is not implementing and enforcing its own environmental laws, and we're in the middle of that process right now. And then I mentioned our other work through the Tijuana River Coalition and showing up before all of these other decision-making bodies. Okay, so let's get into the problems. It is not one problem. There are many problems, unfortunately. So most of you are familiar with some of these because these are the things that make it into the news, this parade of horribles. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, and that's not to minimize them, but I want to spend the bulk of our time today in this presentation explaining how we got here, what went wrong so we don't repeat those mistakes, and what is already being done to fix those problems so we don't try and pile resources onto things that are already being addressed. So, yes, there's a tremendous amount of inadequate and poorly maintained sewage infrastructure in both Mexico and the US through improperly sized facilities, underfunding, decades of deferred maintenance, leaks, spills, ruptures, etc. You'll hear all about that through this presentation. The public health crisis through our water, air, and soil. Certain beaches have been closed almost every single day, dating back to December 2021, which I counted. It's now 1,660 days. But it's not just closed beaches. There's plenty of peer-reviewed science and recent studies finding harmful gases as well as viruses, bacteria, toxic chemicals that are in the water. Those are now being, not now. We have recently confirmed that those are being aerosolized by waves and churning wastewater flows and wastewater waterfalls every minute of every day. So it is no longer safe to breathe, even miles inland. We're not talking just about surfers who can't surf. We're talking about people being able to sleep at night without serious health impacts. This is also an environmental justice and equitable access crisis, as the most impacted areas are Imperial Beach, San Isidro, and the Nestor communities, which are economically marginalized and predominantly Latino border communities. They're suffering a radically disproportionate burden by these constant sewage flows, the severe air pollution, and the loss of healthy and accessible outdoor spaces. And also, don't forget about the communities in Mexico who are dealing with the same thing. It's never safe to go in the water at Playas de Tijuana. Don't do that. They can't enjoy that beach, and they're also exposed to these harmful airborne pathogens and chemicals every day. Um, and finally, of course, there's the poor Tijuana River and Estuary, which is a truly unique and beautiful place. If you haven't been, I highly recommend going. Um, can tell you to check some websites about the safety and conditions of what's going on down there on any given day. But the Tijuana River and Estuary is a Ramsar designated wetland. There are only 41 of those in the United States. It's extremely ecologically valuable, and researchers, unfortunately, are routinely finding ecological dead zones because there's no dissolved oxygen in certain areas that can support any life. We've seen dolphins with sepsis, and there's a tremendous amount of sediment and trash, and I'll touch on that. So I know that was really uplifting, but we'll touch on some improvements today as well. There is some reason for optimism, and I promise this won't be a doom and gloom only presentation. So, with that background, let's get into it. The Tijuana watershed is where we'll start. It's huge. It is, the powers that be at the end of the Mexican-American War just drew a straight line across it. Water actually goes from the U.S. into Mexico and back into the U.S. But ultimately, this whole area drains into this red zone, which is the Tijuana Estuary, which is in the United States. And Tijuana is also a big city. It is now the second most populous metropolitan area in all of Mexico, behind only Mexico City. Approximately 2.3 million people live there, and it has that population has roughly doubled since the 90s. And as the city has grown, it has outpaced its wastewater needs. Mexico hasn't funded or maintained or improved the Tijuana sewage system as it should have. And there are good regulations and permits and laws in Mexico, but they are rarely enforced, as I alluded to earlier with our USMCA petition. And this problem has been around for a long, long time, since at least the 1930s. I'm not going to do an exhaustive history, but there are some notable dates, treaties, and treaty minutes to get us up to speed and make sure everyone is using the same lingo here. So, first of all, there's this entity called the IBWC, and it's actually a binational entity. There's the US IBWC on the US side, and then Mexican IBWC on Mexico's side, which I will refer to as CILA, CILA. When you see that, just think this is US IBWC's Mexican counterpart. Um, then in Yeah, we got these treaties. Okay, in 1990, there was a very important minute 283, which devised a binational infrastructure plan to better capture and treat Tijuana's sewage. It was already becoming a big problem, so in 1990, the two countries got together and said, "Hey, let's build some infrastructure here to address this problem." And that was actually built and finished in 1997. So that is all minute 283 that led to the construction of what we call the ITP, or the International Wastewater Treatment Plant. That ITP is in the United States. Cool. So everyone's following. Um, Unfortunately, the big mistake of minute 283 in the two countries, both of them, they built all this stuff, but then they provided no plans or funding to operate and maintain it. So eventually things started to fall apart. And what did I just say about the population of Tijuana since the mid 90s? Great job, internet participants. You're right. The population doubled. So we have an already crumbling system under the strain of a much higher wastewater load. And then actually starting about 10 years ago, so let's say about 2016, things started to get worse and worse every year until we hit a low point in 2023. So I'll cover all that. I'm sorry, I told you we had to jump around a little bit, but I wanted to give you these important dates, milestones, and backgrounds. Um, as things got worse and worse, there was litigation that Coastkeeper was not involved with. This was the City of Imperial Beach, Surfrider Foundation, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the City of San Diego. A bunch of entities sued the US IBWC for various Clean Water Act permit failures. That actually led to $300 million of federal funding that was supposed to go towards the expansion of the ITP. It was going to take it from 25 million gallons to 50 million gallons per day. That also led to this minute 328, which is very unkind to anyone with dyslexia. We have minute 283 and minute 328. Minute 328 is the 2022 comprehensive infrastructure solution. So they realized things were falling apart. They realized improvements needed to be made, and certain things just needed to be fixed and rehabilitated entirely. So that is the most recent comprehensive infrastructure plan. Okay, I won't go into other things on this timeline. You're probably asking yourself, okay, what the heck is the ITP? What does this infrastructure plan actually look like? Great questions. Here's a super sexy 1997 schematic of the minute 283 infrastructure. Bask in its glory. So this is largely the system that's still in place. Again, this plan was devised in 1990, built in 1997, but this is pretty much what we have today. So we're going to go through a bit of this schematic because I want everyone to understand what's actually happening here. It's complicated. There's a Tijuana collection system. It is intentionally tied into infrastructure in the United States. The US agreed to treat a certain amount of sewage, and that's all part of the plan. So starting on the right of the screen, we have a couple wastewater treatment plants. They treat some water upstream, but then they discharge their relatively clean effluent back into the Tijuana River. Meanwhile, you have the Tijuana collection system, which is leaking raw sewage every day into the Tijuana River and dirtying up that already cleaned effluent. That goes downstream. And then there's this very important component called PB Sela. That's basically Sela's main pump station that sucks. This is old, but this sucks a bunch of very dirty, mostly wastewater, out of the Tijuana River and diverts it for treatment. And it diverts it to two main places. First, there's the ITP, the International Wastewater Treatment Plant, on the US side. And it also diverts it over to the San Antonio de los Buenos wastewater treatment plant in Mexico. Back then, this treated 10 million gallons per day. It is currently operating at 18 million gallons per day. We'll get there. You have all of these pump stations that are very important to intercepting wastewater and actually getting it to this location. If these pump stations are broken, particularly PB1, the wastewater doesn't get from the river and the main Tijuana collection system over to here. And then where does it have to go? Into the United States. Again, we have the wastewater treatment plant in the US, 25 million gallons per day back then. And I also wanted to call out these canyon collector pump systems. So in the US, you have Goat Canyon and Smuggler's Gulch are two major northward flowing canyon systems. And they unfortunately have frequently broken down. When they break down, wastewater bypasses and goes directly into the Tijuana Estuary out into the ocean. And that's a huge problem. Oh, so we had this whole schematic. Everything was great, but honestly, over the past 10 to 15 years, I think every single piece of infrastructure in this schematic broke down. You have the various Mexican pipelines, this international collector, this parallel conveyance pipeline. All of these pumps uh, have broken down or needed significant rehabilitation. The San Antonio de los Buenos wastewater treatment plant, which I'll refer to as the SAB plant now. SAB plant equals that plant that's near Rosarito in Mexico. That was inoperable entirely almost from about 2018 to 2025. And then on the US side too, I mentioned this Hollister pump station, the Goat Canyon pump station, those have been broken down routinely. And then in about 2023, this ITP was almost entirely destroyed. Cool. So, problem not solved. Oh, let's zoom into the canyon collectors. I do want to emphasize that there's Los Laureles Canyon down here in Mexico. That is the same canyon as Goat Canyon. So this flows from this area, end up coming through the canyon collector. There is a diversion and pump station, but it has to be captured and then pumped over to the international treatment plant. Similarly, Matadero Canyon over here that leads straight into Smuggler's Gulch, flows that come into the United States from Matadero Canyon, which are happening every day, by the way, need to be captured, routed to the Hollister pump station, and actively pumped over to the ITP. Otherwise, it goes right into the estuary. Um, yes. And it is important to note that all of the US side infrastructure is covered by a Clean Water Act permit. So there's some sort of regulatory backstop uh, that we can utilize here in the US. That's why Coastkeeper sued the US IBWC. It was failing to maintain its infrastructure and failing to comply with that Clean Water Act permit. But really no entities in the United States have any real control over what is happening in Mexico. Yes, there are treaties and agreements in place, but if Mexico doesn't adhere to those agreements, there's not really a real legal actionable recourse or consequence. And that remains a difficulty. And it's something that folks are working to try and figure out through the USMCA potential renegotiation. Okay. I know we got a little wonky there for a bit. Come on, Arrow. We got to get to the next one. Um, yeah, so things were breaking down a lot. And then in 2022, the EPA and the US IBWC got this $300 million. They entered minute 328, and it says that both countries need to do a lot of different things, like double the size of the ITP, build a new SAB plant, start to look at effluent reuse in different ways, repair different pipelines, and repair a bunch of different pump stations. And at about that time, people were pretty optimistic. Like, yes, we finally got $300 million. That's a big win. Awesome. Let's do this. And then things got worse, which was extremely frustrating. I characterize 2023, maybe early 2024, as a real low point in this entire situation. What does that mean? Um, okay, sorry. First, in the spring of 2023, IBWC said, you know what? We may have miscalculated. That 300 million that was supposed to go towards doubling the size of the ITP, yeah, it's going to cost at least 600 million now. 150 million of that 300 million was needed just to bring the plant back to normal working condition because of years of underfunding, deferred maintenance, neglect, and poor management. And that is when Coastkeeper and our partners over at the Coastal Environmental Rights Foundation initiated our Clean Water Act lawsuit for just rampant violations of the Clean Water Act permit. Then we had in Matadero Canyon a lot of problems. There was a pipe collapse and a sewer line break that led to tremendous amounts of wastewater flows coming into the United States, lots of sediment. There's a huge construction project that is kind of winding down now to build that double-decker highway and repair what happened in that Matadero Canyon. And that led to Mexico was doing a very poor job of managing its exposed sediment during that construction project. And then when sediment flows came into the US, it gummed up a lot of the infrastructure on the US side. So there's kind of a chain reaction of terrible things that were happening. And then, oh yeah, we ain't done yet. In August 2023, we had Tropical Storm Hillary come through, and by the US IBWC's own account, it almost destroyed the entire ITP plant, which in September 2023 was hanging by a thread. But no, this wasn't all the tropical storm borderline hurricane's fault. Recall that the plant was doing poorly for years before due to dramatic underfunding and deferred maintenance. There were literally huge bushes and tomato plants growing out of the ITP's sediment removal units because they were never cleaned out properly. Things like that were happening. Um, Federal funding is very difficult, I have learned. The US IBWC needs allocations specific from Congress to in order, and Congress needs to tell them exactly what to do with that funding in order to build anything. However, IBWC did fail to update and request its year-over-year operation and maintenance funding to just do basic things like clean out its grit chambers so tomatoes weren't growing in there. And this is just a few highlights of what the plant looked like in the middle of 2023. So this is the Hollister pump station, which we pointed out before. 404 pumps inoperable. Surge tank filled with sediment. Awesome. The bar screens inoperable. Effluent pumps, one running but vibrating, one intermittently used as a backup, four inoperable, operating at 30% capacity. Great. What does the non-potable water situation look like? Because you need water to run a wastewater treatment plant. Um, not good. Secondary pump station, all four are inoperable. The waste, yeah, sediment, sorry, secondary treatment, you have your waste activated sludge pumps operating at 50% capacity, and then the activated sludge tanks, two of seven operating at 20% capacity. You get the point. I could go on. But what does all of this mean? It meant that the ITP could not adequately treat sewage it was taking in, so it would discharge partially treated sewage into the ocean through the South Bay Ocean outfall. That's how the ITP treats its water, and then it discharges it through a pipe 3 miles out into the ocean, which we refer to as the SBOO, the SBOO, South Bay Ocean Outfall. Super fun acronym. Okay, so the fact that the ITP was largely hanging on by a thread meant that it could not treat this sewage very well and would discharge out its ocean outfall, partially treated sewage, sometimes untreated sewage. But this didn't necessarily impact sewage or wastewater flows that were just bypassing the plant entirely. That's a separate issue, and we're going to get to that. Okay. The current state of the ITP is much better. Lo and behold, we file a lawsuit and then IBWC really gets its act together. So I am pleased to report that all of those elements and many more that I was just discussing have been completely rehabilitated. IBWC has backup pumps and equipment and redundancies available on site in case of failures. Uh, they have met all of their treatment requirements from the effluent that is being discharged out of the SPOO. The treatment plant was also recently expanded to 35 million gallons per day late last year, and the plant is actually treating 35 million gallons per day, up from the 25. The bad news is that the expansion to 50 million gallons per day has been delayed. Minute 328 said, hey, you need to finish this by the end of 2027, but now it's looking like 2031. They are going to do a phased implementation where they're going to like do some design and build primary treatment and before secondary treatment is fully implemented. But in order to get a 100% solution to this problem, we really need the ITP to be treating its full allotment of the 50 MGD that was agreed upon in minute 328. Okay, what about all the other projects in Mexico, you asked? Oh my gosh, how did you know I was going there? So, there's a lot in minute 328. This is a very helpful portal. There's a GIS portal tool that's maintained by US IBWC because US IBWC routinely meets with its counterparts at SELA. And it's very important for those entities to maintain clear communication to fix a lot of these things. Sometimes they need to coordinate. For instance, Mexico needed to turn off a major pump in Mexico in order to allow IBWC to fix a very important infrastructure component at the plant. Otherwise, it would just be inundated with sewage and it would have broken a whole bunch of things. So, I am also pleased to report a lot of progress on the Mexico side projects of all these pumps and collectors and electrical stations and battery backups. This is what the portal looked like in January 2026. And this is what it looks like as of last night. You see a lot of progress. All the red means nothing has been done. It hasn't been, funding hasn't been allocated, no construction has been started. And then we go to the next one, and a lot of funding has been allocated. The yellow means it's under construction right now, and then green means completed, which is great. So things are happening. I told you this wasn't all doom and gloom. And now we get into the fun stuff of this beautiful map that Nikki helped make. There's a lot going on here, so we're going to spend a little time understanding what the situation is right now on the ground. Now I need to move my face out of the way so I can see this whole map. Sorry. Okay, so the ITP is currently treating 35 million gallons per day. Actually, let's start at the top. The whole Tijuana sewage collection system generates about 75 to 85 million gallons of raw sewage every day. It still leaks a lot of it into the river. PB Sela was recently upgraded, so it can now pull 35 million gallons of mostly sewage out of the river and divert it for treatment. Now the ITP can handle 35 million gallons, which is great. And then it discharges that through the blue line, which is treated effluent, through the SPOO. Okay, great. There's still a lot of other raw sewage, though. Where does that go? Well, PB1 is currently the weak link. There's a PB1A and 1B. Don't worry about that. They're not in great shape. And Mexico operates only three of the four pumps at PB1A and B at night to prevent basically a system failure. So PB1 is under construction right now. Actually, they're building a brand new PB1 and it's a 21-month project. So we're actually expecting that to be done by late 2027. Mexico's working on it right now. That will be huge because this is the limiting factor in these upgrades at this point in time. We'll return to that in a second. PB1 then routes a good amount of wastewater over to the San Antonio de los Buenos treatment plant, but that plant's capacity is only 18 million gallons per day. It receives significantly more, so that results in a discharge of about 22 to 32 MGD of just raw wastewater directly into SAB Creek. And there's no SPOO, there's no discharge pipe here. It just goes right into the creek, and then that stuff ends up on the beach and directly in the surf zone. Then during the summer, you have these currents that push wastewater and pollutants northward, and that's when you see really bad beach and water quality through Imperial Beach and up through Coronado. I mean, obviously, a lot of wastewater can still come through the main stem of the Tijuana River or through these canyon collectors. The canyon collectors are doing okay right now on the US side. So these have been rehabilitated. They're still vulnerable. They don't have as many backups and redundancies in place, but they're capturing dry weather flows and routing it to the ITP for treatment. There are pump stations upstream from the US pumps in Matadero Canyon and Laureles Canyon. Remember, these are the same canyon. They're just called different things in Mexico and in the US. These are being rehabilitated, and it's really important that they start to capture wastewater flows. There's a whole bunch of non-connections and just dry weather wastewater that's leaking into the US on a regular basis. The idea of these pump stations is to capture those and then route them for treatment over to the SAB plant or discharge them into the creek. Right now, we're seeing about 10 million gallons per day of wastewater essentially coming in through the Tijuana River. That is an improvement over the 40 from last summer. And actually, this past winter, flows were about 40 million gallons per day. And I want to touch on that for a second because Mexico had to turn off PBCLA for about 5 months. And the reason they had to turn off PBCLA is because the ITP and US IBWC was repairing a really important junction box to regulate flows into the plant. And without that junction box, they couldn't regulate flows and the whole system was vulnerable to collapse again. So a very important piece of equipment. But it took a very long time to implement it. And meanwhile, 35 million gallons of flows were just left in the river every single day. That's why we saw really high sewage flows and then hydrogen sulfide, air quality issues for a lot of November through April, November of 2025 through April of this year. Okay, once PB1 is fixed, which hopefully is still slated for 2027, then this whole system can operate more efficiently and route most of the wastewater over to SAB from the river. Shoot, I forgot to mention one thing. While PB1 is operating its 3 out of 4 pumps at night, that forces PB Sela to operate only 2 out of its 3 pumps at night. And that is what leaves about 10 million gallons per day in the river. During the daytime, when this is operating at full capacity, flows in the river are virtually zero right now. That's awesome. But PB1 is the weak link that needs to be fixed ASAP. Once they do that, they expect the river flows to drop to about 2 million gallons per day, which would be hugely impactful for the entire Tijuana River Estuary and the region, really. All right, that was your big update. Super proud of this map, but we have some other things to talk about. All right, the air quality issues. First of all, the ocean and wave action churns up pollutants as well. And so then you have sea breezes blowing them inland. Those are still dangerous. But this Saturn Boulevard hotspot, which is there's basically a sewage waterfall that aerosolizes pollutants. You hear the term sewage gas or hydrogen sulfide. We've seen massive spikes of that. That causes headaches, respiratory problems, gastrointestinal illnesses. It's very bad. It's also a sign that there are a ton of other chemicals and pollutants in the air that people breathe all the time. So we need to eliminate this waterfall. That fortunately just took a step forward. Just 2 weeks ago, the Coastal Commission approved a permit for a short-term temporary project to extend these pipes to eliminate the waterfall effect. That's not the permanent solution, but it will take about a year to extend these pipes, apparently. And then there's the permanent project in the works, which is a box culvert. They need to regrade. They need to do a lot of more core construction and kind of reroute the river while they do the permanent project. That effort is being led by the county. But this project, it needs buy-in from the city of San Diego, the county, and the Navy because they all have jurisdictional responsibilities and property right next to each other, which leads me to this jurisdictional nightmare. This is the map of the Tijuana River Valley and the different entities that are involved in managing these lands. So you have the pink is the city of San Diego, the light green is the county, the gray is the IBWC, the bottom tan is Department of Homeland Security, orange is state parks, yellow is other state lands, and the tan and teal are federal and Navy. Like, are you kidding me? First of all, who made this? I've got words. I've got strong words. Second, Coastkeeper and the Tijuana River Coalition and the public, and hopefully all of you watching today, can and are adding a lot of pressure to try and stay on top of everyone. every agency showing up at meetings and asking, what are you doing about this now? Why isn't it fixed? Coast Keeper was very active in getting people to more urgently address this Saturn Boulevard air quality hotspot. Before, there was a lot of finger pointing. It's like the Navy saying, "Oh, it's not my problem." The county saying, "It's not my problem." The city saying, "Oh, well, they need to do something first." And then nothing gets done. So it's infuriating, but we have to stay on top of everyone and sometimes facilitate better communication. So we are extremely busy attending regional water quality control board meetings, coastal commission meetings, and then your City of San Diego Environment Committee, the City of San Diego PUD folks. It's just, it's a lot. Imperial Beach is involved. Um, it's a nightmare. I'll just leave it at that. But I will say, when we show up, they hear us. So that's a call to you today is to learn when these agencies are having their meetings, make a public comment. It's easier than ever now. You can do most of them through Zoom, and it definitely lights a fire under their feet to get them to take action, take this more seriously, and that urgency is desperately needed. Okay, now we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about a totally different issue. Not totally different. Shift your brain though. This is wet weather impacts. Everything we just talked about before is dry weather, no rain, just sewage leaks every day. When it rains, it presents a different suite of issues. This is the sod field after the heavy rainstorms in January and February 2024. It acts as a de facto trash trap. Tons of trash and sediment. I honestly forget how many were cleaned up after these issues. But this is just, a visual representation. This is what it normally looks like. And this is what it looked like after those rains. Um, Wait, okay. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. Then we also have a great example of how these failures of different jurisdictions stack on top of one another. So there was a breach in the Smuggler's Gulch pilot channel. This isn't supposed to happen. The water's supposed to flow from left kind of to upper right. This is our executive director, Philip, pointing out a clear issue. Um, so as we mentioned in the infrastructure plan, water flows through the canyon collectors, and when it's raining, the IBWC is not on the hook for anything. They turn everything off to protect their infrastructure, and they let the rainwater, which does carry a ton of pollutants and also a ton of sediment and a ton of trash, that water flows where it's going to. You can't ever collect and treat the amount of trash and sediment and pollution that comes through in a rain. We talked about the ITP's capacity being 25, trying to expand that to 50. When it rains, the flows are easily 300 million gallons per day and can go above a billion gallons per day. It's just not financially feasible to capture and treat all of that. But okay, what happened in Smuggler's Gulch? Well, the city of San Diego has the jurisdiction to maintain this berm, but the county of San Diego has the jurisdiction to dredge and clean out this channel. What happened? Well, I mentioned a lot of sediment and trash. Over time, you just get this infinite sediment and trash sandwich. This is what it looks like. Here's another great picture. This is Matadero Canyon, that giant construction project that I mentioned. And you can imagine when it rains how much sediment is washed into Matadero Canyon, then into Smuggler's Gulch in the US, and then floods the estuary and the Smuggler's Gulch pilot channel with trash and sediment. And this is what it looked like. This is what Smuggler's Gulch pilot channel looked like March of 2024. Not great. Not great, Bob. So it filled up with trash. The level of this pilot channel is way higher than it should have been. When I looked at the documents, the county was supposed to dredge and clean this for 13 years. It was just sitting on the county's to-do list for 13 years. Every rainstorm created another sediment and trash sandwich. Finally, the cleanup project to dredge and clean this channel was approved October 2023, right before the wet season. But they can't do the dredging while water is flowing. It started raining a lot, and then January and February 2024, this happened. This is where Philip was standing earlier. Water is coming through. It breached the channel, flooded private property. It also made its way over to a brand spanking new campground. They had to shut that down. And you can imagine what this smells like when you have raw sewage just baking in the sun, ponding on private land. So you had the county not dredging. The city actually couldn't repair this berm until the county dredged, and the county couldn't dredge until the water stopped flowing. You had IBWC failing to capture flow because their uh, Hollister pump station was down. Then you had the folks in Mexico not maintaining the sediment in the construction. So you see how one domino falls and it can have this tremendous effect. But here, really, there's multiple failures from multiple agencies that led in this disaster. This is what it looked like after they dredged it. So, hey, another positive improvement. And this is Smuggler's Gulch in September 2024. It was a huge effort. So you see how much sediment and trash is removed. This is just one little area, and this is just Smuggler's Gulch, which is, again, a small canyon compared to the entire Tijuana River watershed and how much sediment and trash must be going into the estuary year in, year out. We need to address that problem too. There's the actual level of the estuary is rising higher and higher, which threatens infrastructure and sorry, and is devastating the ecosystem. I don't have a great report on exactly what's happening there. But what else positive in this world is going on? In July of 2025, Mexico and the US entered this memorandum of understanding saying, hey, we are going to expand the ITP and we are accelerating those deadlines for the Mexico projects. That's the colorful map that I showed you on the Minute 28 projects. Then in December 2025, they signed Minute 333 with a suite of other projects and studies. The real big ones are they're figuring out how to fund ongoing operation and maintenance of all of this infrastructure. And they're using the North American Development Bank to do that. That's huge. There are also studies on expanding the SAB plant, creating a discharge pipe from the SAB plant so it's not just discharging right into the surf zone. And then they have to do a lot of sediment dredging and capture in Mexico. I mentioned the Saturn Boulevard hotspot. Many public health studies have been completed or are underway. That's awesome. SB 54 is a plastic mitigation pollution fund that is giving $5 billion to plastic pollution issues over the next 10 years. You can see how much plastic is in here. It's a massive problem. So that funding is unlocking some opportunities. And we have Prop 4 funding that dedicated almost $50 million specifically for border waste projects. And now I have our three calls to action. First, we still are looking for a declaration of emergency from the governor. And we're going to send some postcards to both Newsom and Javier Becerra, who is the front runner for the governorship. We're going to hedge our bets. You don't know what's going to happen in politics. But that would unlock funding and cut through red tape to speed up the process for a whole bunch of solutions to solve this crisis. Our second call to action is to support SB 58, which would create health-based standards for hydrogen sulfide. Right now, the standard is based on odor and nuisance, not chronic health. And that standard is from 1969. We have much better and more robust science now, and it will create this multi-agency response framework that currently doesn't exist. So it's really going to shift the public health approach from just documenting harm to preventing it. What do we do? What are the safe levels of this? Let's get everybody in a room and figure out how to create a new standard for hydrogen sulfide. And then finally, DOJ and the IBWC have requested $231 million from the federal government for fiscal year 2027. And a lot of people have been supporting and lobbying for this in DC, from Trump's DOJ to EPA, our own regional Chamber of Commerce, Sierra Club, etc. So we encourage you to call your congressional reps at the federal level, Levin, Peters, Jacobs, Issa, whoever your representative is, and urge them to do everything they can to get this funding. It would be tremendously helpful. There are a ton of outstanding questions. Yes, we have not solved everything. What's going to happen with continued population growth? What's going to happen if Tijuana builds a desal plant and the flows continue to increase? What are the long-term impacts on the health of these border communities and the ecosystem? How do we repair those things? And then what do we do? How do these communities have more of a voice to get things done in this dramatically impacted region? Okay. Oh, we'll need one a little over time. You got 12 minutes for questions. Here's some people doing some things in our full PPE. Shout out to Laura and Leslie who go down to the Tijuana Estuary and collect samples every month. Again, don't try that at home, folks. And if you would like to know more, because there's plenty more to share and to learn, here's my contact information. Follow us at our socials, etc., etc. I'll take it away, or I'll kick it back to Nikki to address some Q&A.
First question is, what are the most challenging obstacles to keep making progress? I know funding is probably the biggest issue, but what about the social aspects, people, communications, etc.?
That is a good question. Well, political will is and has been a huge barrier for a very, very long time when you're talking about money. So great example. Just yesterday, we heard that there was a few very specific funding requests, like 25 or 23 million to build that permanent Saturn Boulevard construction fix to stop the sewage waterfall. And that was just flat out killed from the budget negotiations in Sacramento. And we also asked for 2 million to um, keep the trash boom that is in the middle of the Tijuana River going. That request was denied. There are other means to try and obtain that funding, but those were the fastest ones. And we're in the middle of a crisis. It's a years long crisis. It's insane that this has gone on for so long. And when we still have to negotiate for things when there's a limited funding pie, I think the politics of it is the biggest hurdle. There's like that was a multifaceted question though. What about the social impacts, people and communications? Um, I think anyone here, this is great. Go and tell your friends. There are a lot of really passionate, awesome people working on this problem, whether they're elected officials, people that work in government, people that work for environmental NGOs. So a lot of progress is being made on that front to constantly beat this drum of we're not done yet. This is a uh, unparalleled crisis in the US, and it needs to be solved now, not another few years from now. All right, now I can scroll down and review other people's. So Eliza's, who makes up the US IBWC and SELA as an environmental policy professional looking for a new role? How can I get involved in working on this pressing issue? Well, those are federal agencies. So the US IBWC is a federal agency that operates a federally owned treatment works, or the ITP. I don't know exactly how SELA works, but the IBWC commissioner is appointed. They're a political appointee, like Biden appointed a commissioner, and then when Trump came in, he appointed another commissioner. Fortunately, uh, that didn't change the direction of the agency too much. It certainly can, but the Trump administration seems like they're very concerned about this issue as well. And then how can you get involved on working on this pressing issue? I would say follow the Tijuana River Coalition's like listserv and their calendar and Coast Keepers newsletter as well. We are constantly working on this issue. Again, showing up at various decision-making board meetings, the Coastal Commission meetings, the regional board, the city of San Diego. We are trying to proliferate more information about how and when those are happening so that interested folks like you can join and even just showing up and asking a question from the public. A lot of times it's just me or just someone else from our Tijuana River Coalition. It's hugely impactful when anyone else shows up and their voice is heard by any decision-making body, elected official, or agency. Daniel asked, what are the latest health-based standards, or what latest health-based standards could we integrate into this call to action? So the health-based standards for the third call to action, the second call to action for SB 58, those need to be developed. And the SB 58 specifically requires getting a lot of academics and decision makers and agencies in the room to try and decide the pathway for a better standard. Um, so that's kind of a we don't know a number yet. Let's let the experts figure it out. But we are pretty darn sure that the number that they're using right now is 30 parts per billion, 30 parts per billion ppb. Um, and that's insufficient. That's just for odors. What are the long-term health impacts for example, we're seeing a lot of these hydrogen sulfide spikes at an elementary school. What's the long-term health impacts for these kids who are being exposed to maybe 10 ppb? Is that okay? Is that not? How is that impacting their health? We don't know. I don't think science, generally speaking, has that answer just yet. All right. Miley is asking, what reasons or excuses is the California governor giving for his not calling for a state of emergency? The biggest one that I have heard is his excuse is this is a federal problem. Let's not waste California dollars on it. We strongly disagree with that, but that's what we've heard from his office time and time again. All right. Oh, one of my old fraternity members, brothers, BJ. How's it going, man? Shout out. Um, so what's the best way to show up and what should we do as the general public when we do show up? I kind of mentioned that in showing up to these other meetings. Just paying attention to local civics. And even if nothing related to the Tijuana River crisis is on an agenda for a decision-making body that has some influence over the Tijuana River crisis, they almost always have a public comment um, call, like a call for public comments that's for items that are not on the agenda, where the public can just weigh in on their concerns, questions, comments, asking the decision-making body or agency to do something about it. I still think that is the best way right now.
Just a couple more minutes if you want to take two
Yep.
part.
Yeah, yeah. Have there been visits to Sacramento? Yes. Routine communications with Sacramento through Coastkeeper, through our other partners, through organizations that are based in Sacramento, through Sierra Club, through Surfrider. The answer to that is yes. And we routinely talk with our elected officials, our state elected officials that are representatives here in San Diego. Um, all right. And Mila, thank you for this presentation. More of just a comment. Do we have any? Tiffany with a comment. Oh, Leslie said we have two upcoming events, July 5th and July 11th, where we will have postcards if anyone is interested. I'm sure you can also check out where we're going to be on the Coastkeeper calendar of events. And there's a whole bunch of really fun things there. If you want to go learn how to take samples out of Mission Bay, for example. Oh, Ramon asked a great question. Can we talk a bit about the desal in Rosarito? Yeah, so there's a desal plant that's proposed in Rosarito. That would certainly impact overall flows into the system. So there'd be more wastewater generated, then you would need more treatment capacity. It would apply more pressure to the already ailing system that needs to be rehabilitated. We firmly believe that that is a terrible idea. The desal plant here in Carlsbad is nothing short of a boondoggle. It has been the biggest contributor to some of the highest water rates in the nation, our rates and affordability crisis that we have here in San Diego. And a much better way to do things is to recycle the wastewater. Tijuana needs water. They routinely run out. Various neighborhoods' water, they get shut off alerts. They have a severe shortage issue. And it would make a lot more sense to recycle this water, like Pure Water San Diego is doing, like Pure Water Oceanside is doing. A lot of other folks are waking up to the idea that desal is extremely energy intensive, environmentally destructive, and more expensive than wastewater recycling. Um, and then you have a market where there is an incentive to capture water. Instead of the wastewater treatment system just let's if you're from Mexico's point of view, it's cheaper to allow it to go into the river and then maybe the United States treatment plant will take care of it. If you need that water, you then have an incentive to treat it and keep it within your own ecosystem to use it as a valuable resource. Water is water. We're a huge believer in that at San Diego Coastkeeper. So that offers a great opportunity and I would advise everybody advocating for a solution like that, but there hasn't been a very specific action that has been proposed at this time. All right. Great question. Thank you, Ramon. It is 1 o'clock. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and for your questions.